Now, you said that your father wrote a book, and in his book, which I don't remember the name of, he said that the movement would try all legal means to outlaw abortion, but if all those legal means have come to an end, that the use of violence is acceptable. Can you talk about that some?
Sure. When Dr. C. Everett Koop, who, as I said, was Surgeon General for Ronald Reagan, and my dad and I went on the road with a film series called Whatever Happened to the Human Race, that was about the issue of abortion, infanticide, euthanasia, and these other life issues. And in the wake of our going out on a national seminar tour, crisis pregnancy centers began all over the country. There's now over 2,000 of them. Some of these were very legitimate groups of people who were reaching out in a compassionate way that anybody would support to women and children in need, but some became hotbeds of a political type of activism that at the extreme resulted in people gluing abortion clinic doors shut, firebombing them, and in some cases shooting abortion doctors. My dad's book that you asked about was called A Christian Manifesto. It sold about 1 million copies. It was a very little book. And in that book he talked about what he believed to be the truth of the fact that if all political and legitimate options run out on a large issue such as abortion, for instance, or rolling back the legalization of abortion, then Christians had the right to revolution, essentially, to overthrow the government as we know it, to do what the founders of America did in revolting against the British Empire, except to do it in a way that would actually create a second American Civil War if it came to that. And that when other options on abortion and so forth had run out, that force was legitimate. In fact, he compared it to a moral question such as the assassination of Adolf Hitler in Germany. Would that have been moral for a Christian to do? My father's conclusion was that it would be. He equated abortion with murder and therefore, in his mind, morally equal to, say, the Holocaust. And so if you followed that logic out, what you were doing is setting the groundwork for individuals to decide at any given moment that the line had been crossed, that we had lost the election, for instance, that now with a pro-choice president such as Barack Obama or whoever it might be, all legal means were now closed. And so when you go into some person who might be either slightly unhinged or a real fanatic, added that type of thinking into the mix, it would legitimize their picking up a gun and shooting somebody like Dr. Tiller down. Now, I don't know if in that particular case there was a direct line between the murderer and my dad's book, but I do know, for instance, in the case of the abortion doctor who was killed in Florida, that the person who shot him was someone who had read my father and was a fan of his, and I'm sure part of that thinking played into the mix of his own outlook and worldview when he picked up a shotgun and killed not only the abortion doctor, but an escort that was traveling with him in Pensacola. And so what my point has been, not just in my book, Crazy for God, but as I've talked about it on shows like Rachel Maddow's show and other places, has been that there is a direct line of responsibility and culpability that leads back to leaders in the pro-life movement and the far right of the evangelical movement that they always refuse to accept or apologize for, but that inevitably is the framework that when it goes to lone individuals or people who are deranged or people who are fanatics, taking what has been said, the fiery words, and applying them personally to a situation has led to violence and intimidation and all sorts of things that then the leaders draw back in holy horror and won't accept responsibility for, but in fact they are responsible because they have been creating a verbal climate for actual physical acts which are done by people who take what they're saying seriously and at face value. And if you read my dad's book, A Christian Manifesto, and you take it at face value, and for instance you assume that now all legitimate means have been exhausted because you have a progressive Democrat in the White House who's pro-choice, you could see how someone would pick a gun up and say, well, I think I'm being led by God or whatever to assassinate someone. And then at that point it's a little late in the day for pro-life leaders and others to refuse to take responsibility for these actions because they are morally culpable, if not literally associated with the individuals involved. Yeah, I think the first thing you have to say is that words have consequences and that when you have Fox News or various radio personalities, identifying somebody like Dr. Tiller again and again and again as a baby killer or a murderer. Essentially, at one point or another, one can just say it, and one has to say it. This is an incitement to murder. What I think the Justice Department and other people need to do is look as seriously at our domestic terror problems as we look at what we consider to be foreign terrorism. I'll give you an example. If, for instance, it is legitimate to shut down Islamic charities because of some extended or third-party tenuous connection to someone at Hamas or one of these other organizations, it's certainly just as legitimate to look at groups such as Operation Rescue and other pro-life groups and ask what their either personal or ideological connections are to the fringe that do criminal acts. So, for instance, when I was in the religious right, I didn't personally bomb an abortion clinic. I didn't shoot anybody. But I knew that there were people out there picketing clinics who would come back later and boast about the fact that they had snuck off after the demonstration and stuck crazy glue in the locks, or they had chained the parking lot shut, or they had flattened everybody's tires or thrown a brick through the window. And these were the same people who would talk about the fact that maybe they would firebomb a clinic. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that if within a few months someone took a shot at one of the doctors in the clinic, it was probably drawn from this fringe group on the edge of a larger, more respectable, quote-unquote, group of pro-lifers. So I think it's completely legitimate for the Justice Department to talk to the leaders, both nationally and regionally, of activist pro-life groups that are picketing, that are chaining themselves to abortion clinic doors, that are trying to prevent women from going into the clinics, and question them rather closely about their association with whatever members in that local group are taking the next step, gluing the locks shut, vandalizing property, and so forth. They need to know who these people are, in the very same way that the Bush administration made a case for knowing who in some, say, Islamic charity was taking that flight to Pakistan to study at a madrasa or whatever it might be. These became people of interest. So we can't have a double standard here and look at Islamic activity that is judged to be dangerous to the community and then somehow pretend that just because you have another group of people who are committing acts of terror and intimidation in the name of God from an evangelical Protestant point of view, or Roman Catholic, Christian in some form, that it's somehow off limits for the Justice Department to at least look at them with the same level of scrutiny that we look at Arab, Muslim communities and others that become interesting to both the State Department, the CIA, the FBI, and these other people for reasons of connection to international terrorism. We've got connections within the groups in this country to individuals who are dangerous, and I think so far we have kind of held back from taking a harder look. I think the Justice Department should take a harder look. My guess is that we're going to see more violence, not just on the issue of the whole pro-life, pro-choice debate, but maybe other things as well. If the don't ask, don't tell policy is rescinded in the military, which I happen to think it should be, you're going to have an increasing reaction from a certain homophobic element. If for instance, you have, for instance, a Supreme Court appointment and the court tips towards what would be regarded as a more progressive or liberal side, you're going to have another reaction. The fact that we have an African American, the first black president, has I think, ignited the level of hatred that we see in kind of vitriol that's spewed against minorities and immigrants in this country. So I don't think it's all just an issue of the pro-life movement, but I just think that's one point. But I think the real point is that as the right wing and the far evangelical fundamentalist right feels disempowered by the fact that they now have to get used to the idea that after 30 or 40 years of dominating the American political scene, that they have lost some influence in the election of Barack Obama. They've lost some influence in the majority in both houses of Congress. You are going to have a fringe element coming out of these groups that are so deeply embittered and so angry that they're going to stroll into places like the Holocaust Museum and gun people down. And it's going to keep happening. So I think our Justice Department needs to wake up to the fact that we have a group of people in this country who are Christian, who are fundamentalist, who have within their midst individuals who are incredibly dangerous and are simply waiting to go off like bombs ready to explode with the fuse lit. I think there will be more things like this, and I think that, from what I can tell, at this point, the Justice Department has not done enough to look at these groups.